to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership at TEPSA. And each episode, I look to bring you someone who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and bring them on to tell some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I am thrilled this week for my special guest and cousin, Kayla Street on. Kayla, thanks for being here. Tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Well, hello. I'm Kayla. I am Todd's favorite cousin. He left out. Um, and I am an accounting manager in the real estate world. So we work strictly in property management, and I've been doing that for almost 8 years now. And so, that's what we do. We're in Central Texas, my husband and I. And so, yeah.
I still can't believe that you've been there for 8 years. Goodness. And so, Kayla, thinking about growing up, was accounting on your plan of things you wanted to be?
No. I am someone who is I'm very much a planner, and I've had, what will happen in my life at what age,
Mhm.
since I can remember. A lot of that comes from my mom because that's how she is. Um, but it's proven that a lot of those things I've had planned out just aren't what
Mhm.
happens. And so just the humor of the Lord, I think, to grow us through, you think that's your plan, but that's not what's happening. So no, I have a degree from Texas A&M in psychology,
Mhm.
and I always knew I wanted to do some sort of aspect in helping people. Nonprofit was really where my heart was pulled, and I took it. I graduated a year early, kind of by accident. I didn't know it was happening, and went and met with my advisor, and they told me, "Hey, you're going to graduate probably in the summer," and I wasn't prepared for that.
Right.
So home for a year, did a few odd jobs, and just did a lot of volunteer time with different nonprofits, talked to different people in the field to kind of understand, hey, what do I need to do to get where you are? What does that look like? Um, and after talking to a lot of places, they just kind of let me know that to be where I wanted to be, I needed a master's or doctorate, some sort of graduate degree. I wasn't interested in clinical counseling at that
Right.
time. And so I didn't know what it was going to look like. So just kind of, I moved up here where I live now on a whim. I had a friend with an open bedroom, and I moved up here with the intention of doing grad school. And every time I went to put in my application for grad school, I just never had a piece about it.
Right.
I met with the school several times. Um, knew what I needed to do, but just never had a piece about it. And I started working okay, I'll work for a little bit and then go to school. And we all know that that's what makes it
Right.
complicated. So once you start working, you're like, why in the world would I go back to school?
Yeah.
Um, so I ended up with a company that was kind of young and still kind of starting up. And I think that they thought that maybe accounting was in my DNA because it's what my
Mhm.
dad does.
Right.
And so they said, hey, you're really good at details. And this is where your strong suit is. So could you kind of take this route with us? And that's what's happened.
Mhm.
Um, I wouldn't trade my degree in psychology for anything. I love it. It benefits me more than I can explain. I still do a lot of nonprofit, just strictly on a volunteer side of
Right.
things, 'cause that's still really where my heart is. But I've found that I have strengths and details and numbers, and I'm really good at being a bean counter. So
Well,
I've done for the
what
last.
I love about that, though, is a reminder that, we don't always have to know what we wanna be when we grow up or what we even when we're in adulthood and we think we know the job that's meant for us, and then sometimes things just fall into our laps that you're like, I actually really enjoy this. This was not anywhere on my list, but hey, I can do this. And so
Yeah, yeah,
that's just so funny to me. Well,
yes.
Kayla, you and I also had a similar path in waiting a little bit longer than most of our parents did to get married, and finding that person a little bit later into our 20s. And so I know for you, it was a lot of, and for me too, it was a lot of thinking like, when am I going to find the right person? And then when that right person came into your life, it was like all the pieces came into the perfect alignment. And I know with you and Garrett, that was kind of how that was. And so tell me a little bit about like what it was like meeting Garrett, and then and now what married life has been like.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. So back to that, having my whole life planned out, I was going to be married at 22 and definitely have one kid by 24. Like that was
Yeah.
happening. Um, and I was not even married at 24 and didn't have children. So that wasn't happening. My mom, I have one sister, and my mom was married literally right after she turned 20. So she was
Mhm.
basically 19 and married her high school sweetheart. And then my sister dated one guy and married him. I think they dated like 4 months or something
Yeah.
like that.
It's
And
short.
so I just knew, like, if I'm not married by 22, like my life is over because that's all I had ever seen. And I remember you and I were like, we're the cool cousins just living
Mhm.
our life, but deep down, knowing like we would love to be married, but we're gonna soak up this time.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, for me, it was a lot of time just realizing like I had put these expectations on myself, but I didn't have to stop living my life just because things weren't going the way
Right.
that I planned them. So I spent like a lot of time pre Garrett that I didn't realize I needed was just kind of learning how to be independent.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't realize I was such a dependent person and really dependent on my parents and what they believed and what they said was right or wrong. And I didn't have a lot of time to really define who I was. And during that time of my life, I wasn't necessarily happy that that's what I was
Right.
going through. But now looking into my marriage, I'm like, man, I'm so glad that I had that time because
Yeah.
I feel like it makes me a better wife sometimes. Um, so yeah, so then meeting Garrett and I met at a Super Bowl party, and it was with a church function, and so we were there, and I just kind of was at that point. I just knew like, hey, I'm ready for marriage. And so I was at
Mhm.
a point in my life of like, hey, if we aren't feeling this at like, 6 months in,
Yeah.
then let's just be honest with each other and tell each other, like, hey, let's move on, go our way. And I think that just took a lot of me, moving up here on my own, didn't have any of my family here with me, uh, creating a job that wasn't something I expected to be in, creating my own friendships, just buying my own house, just
Yeah.
different stuff that I needed to go through in life by myself to prepare me to be a better wife for him. And married life, shoot, you learn stuff every day about yourself. Like you think you know yourself, and then you're stuck in a house with someone else all the time, and you're like, oh, okay. They're very good at character development, like bringing
Mhm.
things out in you. And I mean, he's the best. I laugh all the time at how much he like does for me and just the roles he plays. And
Mhm.
I mean, he is someone that was definitely worth going through all those years where I
Right.
thought my life was over or I
Yeah.
didn't measure up in comparison because I wasn't married by an age
Mhm.
that, the rest of my friends were, my what I had seen in my family. But I'm super grateful now to have gone through all of that just to have led me to him because he's totally worth it. So,
Well, and it's one of those reminders of, in the moment, we hate going through those doubts and those difficult times, and then when it ends up leading to exactly what it's supposed to lead to, you're like, "Oh, well, I'm okay that that happened because it led here." But in the moment, you're like, "No, I hate this day. I hate this year, whatever." Um, Well, and I love Garrett too. I think he's so funny, and it's so, and sometimes you can feel like the person you end up with was like, I wouldn't have expected me ending up with this person, but it is like the perfect match. Did you find that with Garrett too?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's just so funny because I feel like in mates we look for, like, at least for me, I looked for males in my life and what I
Hmm.
appreciated about them. And it's so
Right.
funny now, things that Garrett does that I'm like, oh my gosh, my dad always does that. Or
Hmm.
there's shows he's watched and I'm like, of course you like that show because Todd watches that show. And so it's just stuff that I'm like, it's just so weird that we're kind of programmed in a sense on what we are drawn to. And so it's funny now looking back on like all of those things that led up to him, and you're like, oh, hey, this makes sense now. So
Yep. I love it. Well, Kayla, something that is unique about your story as well is that you suffer with OCD. And so, when did you notice that you had some OCD tendencies in your life?
yeah. It first started when I really remember understanding it was when I was 15. So I was a sophomore in high school, and it can manifest itself in different ways for different people. For me, it was primarily through hand washing. And I learned that any stressors that would really come into my life that I felt I could fix them, or something told myself that I was free of those stresses if I could just wash my hands. And it definitely did come from a large idea of germs, whatever it may be. um, and I could identify then and even now in struggles with it that those fears are a bit irrational. But I knew as soon as I could wash my hands that I felt okay. I felt a little
Right.
more normal as long as my hands were clean. Um, and so it started when I was about 15, and I, I have no idea. Like, I can't pinpoint one thing that brought it on. But then I started therapy for, hey, something dropped.
Did I lose you? Wait, there you are. Okay, you're
Oh,
back. I think you're back. Okay, there you were a little choppy, so I was like, did I lose her? Is she back?
oh, no,
Okay. So and so when you did notice that you had some of those tendencies, was it a like, oh my gosh, do I tell my family? Like, do I just try to get over this? Do I just try to pretend like it's not happening? Like, what kind of went through your mind?
Mhm. I'm trying to remember if I brought it to my mom's attention first or if she noticed it. And I would probably say a little bit of both. She's very observant about that. For me, I'm very much a verbal processor when, and different times back then and even now, have different times where it's stronger than others based on certain stressors in my life.
Mhm.
Currently, coronavirus and like germs and things
Mhm.
like that are bringing an influx of that. And so I when that would happen, I think sometimes what I've learned has helped me then and even now is speaking the thoughts, like, this is what my brain is. I feel like I have germs because of this or that, and needing my mom to tell me like, no, you're okay, or
Mhm.
someone in my life that I can trust to tell me you're fine. And then once
Yeah.
I've built and established that relationship with someone and know I can trust them, as long as they tell me I'm okay, then believe that mechanism.
Yeah. And and that makes total sense. And so, if there is a parent who is listening today and they think their child may have OCD tendencies or something like that, how can they bring it up with their child without their kid feeling like they're being judged?
That's a good question. Um, for me, the biggest thing is validating how I'm feeling. That I may recognize it's irrational, but not, um, it's something I would want them to know is that it's not something I'm choosing to think. And it's not
Mm,
something that I feel I can necessarily control. So, and even now in my life, my husband's the one who answers most of those questions for me when I'm having a tougher time with it. And just needing parent child or whoever it may be, just needing them to really listen to what's going on.
mhm,
They may not understand it, but not to be dismissive about it or tell
right,
me that I'm being dramatic, words like that, trigger words that then I start to believe something wrong with me rather than treating that there's a disorder. It's not necessarily me, but there's this disorder that's inside of me that I can't control. And so I just need someone to help, they just need you to help cope through it. But not try to fix it, just really listen to what those fears are and then honestly tell them, hey, this is what I know to be truth. And then how can we move forward from that?
Well, and I think that's a great point too, is you don't have to agree with it or completely understand, but at least validate that person because like you said, when you don't feel validated, then those thoughts begin to take over, and then sometimes it can make you spiral even worse into some of those tendencies because you're like, I nobody listens, nobody cares, everybody thinks I'm making this up or I'm being dramatic. And so I think that just that idea of listening is huge. And I know you also, you recently took a sabbatical from social media. And so I think that, what I love about you is that when you get to a point where you see certain things beginning to spiral or fears happen or these irrational thoughts come in, you start to put up little protectors for yourself too. And I think that's important for people to understand. When did you realize that, okay, I have to put up some boundaries if I'm going to be able to keep myself under control?
Yeah. I would say that happened more in my adult life. I think OCD is something that you never really overcome.
Right.
I can't say for everyone. For me specifically, it is something that I wouldn't say I struggle with every single day, but it's different seasons of my life.
Mhm.
For me, it really comes down to a control issue that usually there's something else I'm trying to control.
Right.
And when I feel like my life is out of control, then that's when it starts coming out through hand washing or really anxious thoughts all the time. Um, and so for me, just learning more about it, I mean, that started when I was 15, and I've been, in and out of therapy different times in my life. Um, but for me, just kind of learning in my adult life, probably post college, I would say, understanding that, hey, it's okay to talk about something I struggle with, and
Mhm.
then really identifying. And when I sit down and think about it, like, okay, when am I seeing an increase in the fear? Am I seeing more anxiety? Um, and so that's why recently for me, and it comes through a lot of, as long as I can talk about it with my inner circle and with people I trust, I really depend on them to help me with that too. Where with
Yeah.
social media, it happened recently of just complaining to my husband about things on social media. And then he was like, why are you? And he's not on, he hasn't been on social media for probably 2 years now. And
Yeah.
so then, like, hey, I think you should just, get rid of it for a little bit. And I was like, how in the world connect with my people? Like, I can't see them. And so I did. I just deleted it off my phone, and so that's been an easy thing. And even now, knowing, like, and I think as your inner circle and you're more honest about it, they can really read your face,
Yeah.
like, hey, I can tell you're struggling right now, talk about it. And as long as I allow myself to be vulnerable and transparent, then they kind of can help me set up those guidelines. And it's really just digging deep to find, where am I finding my heart rate is increasing the most? Like, what am I
Mhm.
doing while that's happening? And then just kind of cutting those things out. And sometimes it's cutting them out cold turkey and,
Mhm.
getting rid of those things. So,
Well, I think that's great advice and good for people to hear is that, you can't always just expect things to get better. Sometimes you have to take some of those steps, and sometimes they are uncomfortable and you don't want to necessarily get rid of it because you think you can't live without it. And then you're like, no, this is what's best for me. And when I start taking care of me, that's when that becomes important. Well, Kayla, one question I always love to end these conversations on is there's lots of different people who listen to these episodes. Some are educators, some are just parents, some are just regular people. And so, if there was one thing on your heart that you wish more people in this world knew or understood, what would your one thing be?
Yeah. I would say that overall, in general, and this probably my psychology background, just to pay attention to your mental health.
Mhm.
I think we focus a lot on our physical health. We can tell when something's hurting us or we have an ailment, but that our mental health is really so important. And I know there's a lot of stigmatism around
Right,
mental health, but really just being, taking time to self care. And I don't really mean like spa days or bubble baths
right,
or things like that, really just taking time to learn ourselves. Like, hey, what makes me tick? What makes me anxious? What makes me happy? And now that we live in a world where we have this extra time, it might be even more important to pay attention to those things. Like, what are
mhm,
my triggers? What are things that um, take away stress, whether it's working out or getting outside and exercising, like, well, whatever that may be.
yeah,
And so my advice would just really be to seek out emotional intelligence for not just yourself, but the people in your world too.
right. I love that. Well, Kayla, I love you and your stories, and I'm so thankful that you chose to take this leap with me today and get outside of your comfort zone and share some of it with my viewers. So thank you, Kayla.
Yes. Thank you, Todd.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, it's there. I hope today's conversation with Kayla has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story because every story matters.